And we are live. So, welcome to Thoughts for Change Makers LinkedIn Live, where we challenge the status quo, elevate performance, and foster exponential growth. Today, let me introduce my guest, Jess Stuart, based in New Zealand. Are you still in New Zealand now, currently?
I am
Yes?
in New Zealand now. I am at home, yes, which is nice
Yes.
after a lot of travel.
Yeah. So she is an international speaker, so that's why I was asking, coach and author of not only one, neither two or three, but six personal development books specializing in mindset and performance. And she's been a senior leader with a decade working in human resources and a brush with burnout in her corporate career led Jess across the world to train with Buddhist monks and nuns. So, welcome, Jess, to this LinkedIn Live. And by the way, I had a bit of an issue with daylight saving. So, I did just recreate the event. I will be sharing the link with the people that register if they can't see it on LinkedIn right now. And if you are joining us live, please drop some comments, questions into the chat, and we will get them onto the screen as they arrive. So, Jess, I really like to ask one question to all my guests, and that is about performance. And I'm gonna choose this one for you. What would be your definition of individual performance? So, what does it mean for you?
For me, when I think of my own performance, and well, those I work with as well, it is to be energized to do your best day in, day out, but knowing that that looks different day in, day out. So being able to meet yourself where you're at, respond to the energy that you've got, and deliver on what you know you're capable of, but without burning out in the process.
Mm. And talking about burnout, so that's one of your book, Brilliance to Burnout. I think it's your latest book, if I'm not mistaken.
It's the one before the latest. So yeah, there's just one more that's squeezed out this year, but that was last year's. Yeah.
Mm. So, and what made you choose this title, like Burnout to Brilliance? What is this book about?
So for me, the book I'd written previous to that was all around leadership, particularly women in leadership. And we talked a lot in that book about imposter syndrome. And so that became the work I'd been doing. And what I noticed is that everybody that came to me with imposter syndrome also suffered from burnout. And I think often when we're trying to over deliver or prove ourselves, we are more at risk of burnout. And of course, both of those things attract high achievers. And where high achievers are concerned, burnout is more prevalent because people that are not good at what they do don't burn out because they don't do enough of it or get the opportunity to. So for me, it was the logical next step. And obviously with the pandemic, that exacerbated a lot of the conversations we had around burnout. And we've seen it increase in the statistics, obviously, since COVID as well. So it felt like something we needed to tackle, not just in a way of helping prevent people from burning out, but actually talking about what brilliance looks like, what good performance looks like, because I think sometimes it's the pursuit of good performance that actually lands us at burnout.
Mm. And I'm just going to ask to double click on this notion of imposter syndrome because we might have people that are joining us right now and they might wonder, can we have a refresh on what is imposter syndrome?
Yeah, so imposter syndrome is this concept that describes high achieving individuals who have an inability to internalize their accomplishments. So, in the face of praise and recognition, we tend to wave it away or downplay it. But we also have this persistent fear of being exposed as a fraud. So, it sounds in our head like one of these days they're going to find out that actually you don't know as much as they think you do.
Mm. And so you were thinking that maybe it's touching predominantly women more than men, or just because your work is more with
Yeah.
women, or is it like some paper out there that say that maybe women are going through that more than men?
It's according to the International Journal of Behavioral Science, 70% of us experience this, regardless of gender. But obviously, I work predominantly with women, so my view is
Mhm.
slightly skewed in that space. And I think in our societies, women are we're more able to discuss our vulnerabilities. So I think it's not that men don't get this, it's just that they're not probably at the point in our society where they're encouraged to discuss their vulnerabilities or share some of this stuff in the same way that women are.
Okay. And so now, if we have anyone that is also like recognizing themselves as high achiever, going through some maybe imposter syndrome, um, and 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 then maybe they are not able to recognize signs of burnout. Like, do you feel it's easy for those people to recognize those signs of burnout?
Not at all, no. I think it's one of those things that we recognize in hindsight. So I know for me with my own burnout, looking back, all the signs were there, and it's really easy to see looking back, but it was not easy to see at the time. And I think quite often, even if someone else sees it, we're not open to hearing it or to having the conversation, because there's still a bit of a stigma attached to that conversation, that if someone approaches you and says, hey, I think you're burned out, we think, oh, they're telling me I can't keep up, or I can't cope, or I'm not performing at the level I should be. So we're quite defensive to it. And it's also a slow burn. So it's not a flick of a switch where we wake up one day and go, oh, I'm burned out. It's that slow burn that can be so difficult to notice until sometimes it is too late and we've hit that wall and we've got sick.
And so, like, can you share some of those signs that maybe people can get more awareness around? Because
Yeah.
I think it's
Yeah,
really
definitely.
important to have this conversation.
Yes, 100%, because it helps us look out for it, not just in ourselves, but in others as well. And there's sort of, in that scale of, the mild to the more serious end of burnout, it starts off with something that we might easily dismiss as just stress, which of course the difference between burnout and stress is that stress has an end that we overcome. And burnout is that prolonged stress where there is no light at the end of the tunnel. So we often notice a lack of focus, impacts on our results, struggle sleeping, overwhelm, not taking breaks. They're the early signs. And a lot of that is manageable. But if that continues, what we then start to notice is anxiety. We can start noticing withdrawal. So we withdraw, not just at work, but even from things in our social life, like friends, hobbies, interests. We start to lose motivation, even for the things we enjoy. Our good habits start to become more difficult, and our bad habits, unfortunately, at that same time, start to become a lot easier. And at its height, it is this hopelessness when we look to the future. It is a complete disattachment, so disconnect from who we are in our life, and an exhaustion that sleep cannot fix, no matter how much of it that we have. So I've seen in my own burnout journey, some of the things that I would often say, hey, look, it's just part of the job. I'm busy at work. I can't be expected to have a social life as well. I would easily drink a glass, then a bottle of wine on a Friday, and not just a Friday, but I'd say that's my reward for a hard week at work. I'm unwinding. And I didn't have the motivation to even go for a walk on the beach, even though that's why I moved to the beach, and I knew it would help. And it's one of the things I love the most. And they're the things for me that in hindsight, had I have known this at the time, would have been my red flags. But I was able to explain it away and excuse my role because I'd just taken a promotion and everything was very busy, almost make excuses for it until I got sick.
Yeah, and do you think this drinking could be also a numbing way of dealing with it?
Definitely. So yeah, we find that to cope, when we get to this space, to cope, it shows up differently for everybody. So it can be in alcohol, it can be in relationships, it can be in food, shopping, exercise. A lot of people will over exercise in this space. But as well, I think there is this kind of in almost like a turtle going back into its shell. There is this withdrawal of us into ourselves that can happen when we get too overwhelmed. And I think that was certainly true for me. Yeah.
Okay. And then, so how do we get to this brilliance? So imagine, okay, we've been going through, we can detect this burnout early, or maybe we are going through it. Then the recovery phase is pretty long. I think that's what people are not taking seriously enough. Like, because it's not something that you can see from the outside world. Like, sometimes if you break your leg or your arm, leg, I'm kind of like, oh, you can see it, so people can see it, and then you understand that there is some recovery that needs to happen. But for burnout, because no one can really see like something that is visible, it's kind of intangible. People don't really realize the time that is needed to recover. But again, people feel that they will be back as they were. And I can see it that no, you just transform through this experience.
Yes, 100%. And I think when I was writing the book, Burnout to Brilliance, there was two big myths that I busted for myself around performance. And that was this myth that more is always better. So the way we get to brilliance is just by working more hours and performing at our peak day in, day out. And what we've seen is that that's actually what lands us at burnout, not brilliance. So it's not more is always better to get us there as we first thought. But the other myth that was busted as a result of this book was that because brilliance, we're all capable of it on our given day, because we're capable of brilliance, we should expect it every day. And we can't, right? We have peaks and then we have troughs, just like the waves. When you look at the ocean, you get the peak wave and then the trough. And for us to hit that peak wave, we need that trough, that still water, and that's our rest and recovery time. And if we don't have that, we can't hit the next peak. So instead of it being kind of one line that goes along the top of the screen until we fall off the end with burnout, it shouldn't be kind of a wavy line that gives us these peaks and troughs, so the ability to rest and recover. And I think that's a more sustainable approach to performance, and that's what gets us to brilliance, because our current method is actually just landing more of us at burnout, and that's of course the wrong end of that scale that we want to be.
Yes. And now, how do you see it in the workplace?
In the workplace, I think it's been an interesting conversation because I've seen it evolve with our awareness around mental health. This conversation has evolved, but I think it's been in the category of wellness for too long. And I don't mean that disrespectfully, because that's a really important conversation to have. But I don't think at a senior leadership level, conversations about wellness are taken as seriously as conversations about performance. And I think when we start talking about brilliance and burnout and sustainability from a performance perspective, the conversation carries more weight. And that's what I'm seeing in the workplace. So for me, it's this sustainable approach to our staff. And we talk about sustainability in our environment and our business, but not in terms of our staff. And I think this is the key. It's almost like, I'll often say to the people I work with, when you're on a road trip and the fuel light comes on in your car, you'd never not stop at a fuel station. You find the next one you can and you stop there and refuel, because otherwise your car breaks down. It doesn't get you to where you want to be. But I think for us, so many of us have got empty tanks, and yet we're saying we can't stop, we don't have time. But when we think about our road trips, even though it adds minutes onto our journey, we always stop at the fuel station because that's how we know we get to our destination. And I think if we started using that towards our own approach to performance and how we manage our teams, then we're getting a more sustainable approach to performance, rather than going hard out for as long as we can and then needing this time to recover from burnout because we've gone too far.
Yeah. And also I see another trend currently that leaders, managers, they are asked to do more with less resources. So either less time, less people, and that's not looking good.
Definitely. Yeah. And that adds to all of this, right? And especially the challenges leaders face now post-pandemic, the challenges are kind of layered on top of each other. And you add to that the challenges the world has, in terms of the evolution of AI, the economic uncertainty, the amount of change and uncertainty that we live in, and the responsibility of a leader now to support their staff in a way that we've never had to think of pre-pandemic. There are so many different challenges, the ones you deal with day to day around your business and hybrid working and staff shortages. So you add all that together, and it's I guess it's more challenging now than it ever has been, I think.
And so that's why we need to have sustainable approaches, because it's a fact now. That's change is there and will always be there. And Do you feel sometimes we go on with like limiting belief or like old mindset that are not up to date? Because I do challenge people when they told me that they don't have enough time and they don't have enough resources. I challenge them because with thought-provoking questions, because we realize that they are stuck into some beliefs that are not really true. Like they believe they need to do that, they believe they need to do this, but in fact, they realize that they don't, or they can find other ways. So it's about asking themselves different questions that can get those outcomes in different ways. There is not only like option A or option B. Most people, they get stuck into this dichotomy of, okay, there is option A or option B. And in fact, we are not living in a world where it's black and white. It's not even gray, it's colorful. And so we can come up with much more options that ultimately will be helping us to get to where we want. I'm kind of going into a tangent, but as well, if people are jumping live, please ask questions and thoughts or remarks on this topic. We'd be glad to see what you think. But what do you think about what I just said, Jess? Or what's your perspective on that?
Yeah, I think you're so right. I think we treat our whole entire to-do list like it's an emergency, and half of it on there is not. I think we've also been led to believe that, ever since the Industrial Revolution, where we paid people by the hour to work in factories, there's a model of the more hours you work, the more valuable an employee you'll be. And I often teach people this difference between busy and effective, because busy is often the badge of honor that we wear that says, I'm a great employee because I work so hard. And yet it's also the path to burnout. If we're being effective, it's not about the quantity of what we do and the amount of hours worked. It's about the value and impact we're making. And that's a quality measure. And I think that's the difference. And our workplaces, of course, have been set up on this model that favors quantity, but we don't get paid by the hour anymore to work in factories, many of us. And yet we're still using that same model. And I think one of the things that often sticks with in my workshops with people is this relationship I discovered when I was researching for the book with the word priority. So in the English language, when you look at the word priority, it never existed as a plural. It was only ever supposed to be a singular. So you go back to the 1400s and priority existed to mean the one thing that is more important than anything else. And we don't see it used as a plural until the 1900s, around about the Industrial Revolution. And now we have 30 priorities and wonder why we feel overwhelmed and like we're spread too thin and can't do any of them to the best of our ability. So, and I get in our real life, we don't just have one priority, but when we focus on one thing at a time, or we pick the one thing off that to-do list that is the actual emergency, that is such a better investment of our time and effort and energy. And it reduces some of that overwhelm as well. And of course, we know then once we've done that priority, there's another and then another and then another, but we're just chipping one off at a time. So I'll always have on my to-do list a little post-it note, and that's got the top 3 things for today. That might be my priority this morning, that might be my priority at lunch, and that might be my priority this afternoon. And that helps really focus in on what's important, because otherwise, if we're looking at our whole to-do list like it's an emergency, we will feel overwhelmed and we won't be able to get it all done.
Yes. True, and sometimes as well, what I see as a behavior, it's about emails, our relationship with our inbox, and that one can be very nasty, right? What's your thoughts on that one? Because I'm sure you, in your workshop, or you have participants that will say something about their inboxes.
Yes, definitely. And any distractions, whether it's our inbox, whether it's notifications on our device, on our smartphones, Slack messages, we have got more distractions now than we've ever had before, and it takes us away from focus. And there's been some really cool science and research done in this space around interruption science. And it actually shows that when we get interrupted, we get less clever. We lose like 10 of our IQ points. It doubles our error rate, even when they're very small interruptions. And so we're living in this world where we're losing focus because of these interruptions. And so we can never do very deep work. We're always just skimming the surface because of these distractions. And of course, you overlay that hybrid working. If you've got kids at home when you're trying to work, or if you're in the office and it's open plan, there are so many opportunities to break our focus and distract us, that it's very difficult to be at our best often these days.
Correct. And as you said, that leads also to poor decision making. It's like poor performance, poor decision making, and then it's starting like a never ending circle, like a vicious cycle that people are getting on and on and on. And so what's the solution? Or of course there is no one solution, but what are the things that maybe we could share today with people so they can think about and that they can start making some adjustment, some change? So ultimately, I like to say it's like if you don't like the outcomes, change the inputs. So what are the adjustments in terms of inputs that we can share today with them?
Yeah. One of the most impactful things for me and for a lot of the clients I worked with has been this concept of space. So I think particularly as leaders, our diaries are often full. We've got those inboxes and those emails. We've got reports to write. We've got back-to-back meetings. We've got one-to-one catch-ups. We've got all of this stuff going on. And our brains, when they're in busy doing mode, are not in what I call being mode. And often when we stop and we let our brains just be, it's then that we tap into this space that we have, that it's where we do our strategic thinking. It's where we have innovation and creativity. It's where we have thoughts that we didn't even know we needed to have, but it turns into our best idea. And I think this is one of the skills that we're underusing as leaders. So I think if we use that more, we get more calm, we get more clear, we get more focused, and it does give us more innovative thoughts. It allows us to solve problems and make decisions quicker and easier and more accurately. And it'll often be why we have a solution to a problem or our best idea when we're in the shower or walking the dog or driving home, because we've given our brain that break away from the doing to be able to access this state. And I think quite often from a productivity focus, leaders think that to be productive, they've always got to be at their desk doing or sat in front of a person doing. And it's often this space and this being that can make the difference, particularly where that value and impact piece comes in. So for me, when I take space away from my office, it's where I have my best ideas. But if you looked at it from the outside, you would think I wasn't at work. I could be at the beach, I can be in a cafe. I'm not in my office. And yet the impact it has on my business is huge because my brain is allowed to think differently, and it creates this space for, I guess, the magic to happen, right?
So yeah, it's one way is to create buffers in your calendar, in your schedules, for being and get your mind wandering as well, and rest and recover in a sense. And yeah, because I can see as well there is something that people are doing out there. It's like they start their week, it's fully scheduled, like back to back, as you mentioned, and then they don't have time for any emergency or urgency. So they add that on the top, and there's definitely no room, no space, as you mentioned, to do this thinking, to do this strategically thinking. But when they have that, they can make better and faster decisions that ultimately will transform the outcomes. So
Yes.
how can we nudge leaders in companies to allow their people to think strategically?
Yeah. And it's a really good question, right? Because a lot of the time we don't. We favor this busyness, this action, this doing. And that is a massive part of most people's job, granted. But when we start looking at value and impact over hours worked and quantity, that's when we start to see the biggest shift. And I always say with leaders, it's how you role model this stuff. It's what you do that then allows others to do that too. So I think quite often, even with this stuff, when we're saying, this is what I'd like you to do, if we're not doing it, it doesn't really matter what we're saying because our staff will follow our example, not our opinion, right? So it's what we're doing, it's how we're showing up and role modeling some of this stuff that makes the difference.
And as well, I guess something that maybe need like a bit of a shift is about how we measure performance, maybe. Because a lot of people, they will say, oh yeah, I'm hearing Jess and Lison, but I have some KPIs, and that's how I am I need to be measured. So like this thinking strategically is not taking part of it. And so that's maybe where as well, if like it's about role modeling, but as well like what do we measure?
Yes. And it's counterintuitive, right? I'll often talk about this as this concept of slowing down to speed up, which is counterintuitive because if we stop or if we make space, we should be using that time productively to do things. And yet, if we slow down and create this space and then invest in some of these habits, what we find is that when we come back to our work and to our KPIs, they don't take as long. We make less mistakes because we're sharper and fresher. We can make decisions better and more accurately, solve problems easier. So what we might be looking down the barrel of a 4-hour work day, say when we come back from our lunch break, which sometimes tempts us not to take a lunch break because there's so much to do. And yet after that lunch break, we're so much more effective that 4-hour workload is now only going to take us 3. So we've saved an hour by having a 30-minute break. And it's that concept again of the stopping at the fuel station. We think it's going to add time onto our journey, but it actually saves us time. It makes sure we get there. It helps the metaphorical vehicle perform better. And I think that's how we need to start seeing this. Because when we slow down, we do in fact speed up and become more effective. So it's not a waste of time. It's actually creating time for us. And when we take that shift in our brain around how we see that, it becomes much more of a performance hack than what we might think of it traditionally. And that is, time off or rest or something that's not terribly productive.
Yeah, and I want to add something on what you just said to remind people that time is our most precious resource. Most people believe it's money, but you know what? Time, you can't replenish it. When it's gone, it's gone. Money, you can replenish it. So, do you value what's your relationship with your time versus what is your relationship with your money? And is time above money in how you in your perspective of life? I would be keen to see some comments on that one if anyone is watching us live. So with the software, I can't see how many people are joining us. So if anyone is there, please tell us what is your relationship between time and money, and do you value time more than money? Because when time is gone, it's gone. Money, you can replenish.
We're often trading the two, though, aren't we? We're often trading the two, particularly where work is concerned. We give up our time to go to work to earn money, and then we spend that money on things that save us time, like dishwashers and cars. And so I think it's that constant trade of the two. But you're right. I mean, there's this saying that there's always enough time if it's important. You make time for something, right? If it's important. And I think time is the one thing that we think we're all too short of.
And coming back on that notion of like knowing what's important, and just before you talk about priority and as singular, but most people will have priorities. So what's your view on our perspective on helping people to get their focus and priority clear?
Yeah, there's a number of good models and frameworks out there for this. But I think it's being clear on what priorities mean to you and how your schedule aligns to your priority or priorities or not. Because I think priorities are not just about the things our boss wants us to do. Although obviously if there's a looming deadline and there's massive consequences for something not getting done, then that becomes a priority. But I think for many of us, we get this sense of meaning and purpose and values alignment that is just as much a part of our priority as whatever is on our to-do list. So knowing whether our schedule matches our priorities, I think, is a really good check to do. And of course, this can then mean that the priority is actually me today and some self-care because I haven't had any for 2 weeks because work has just been flat out. And so that becomes the priority to stop me from burning out, as an example.
Yeah, and as well, it's about knowing about your conviction a bit more, like going back to your values. What is important for you? What are your values and convictions? Because we can be distracted a lot, but once we get clear on our values and convictions, priority can flow, and so our decision making, it's kind of like having a filter that we can go through it.
Definitely.
Yeah, I'm talking more like whether it's professional or personal. You know, it's really important and really key to get some focus ongoing and to not be distracted and overwhelmed. And now, Jessica, so how do you know, like, when people are behaving into their brilliance? How would you recognize that? Or how do you know that they are doing something, like, you know, and sometimes you see someone and say, oh, I want what they are having.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting because I think when you see somebody who is embodying their brilliance, even before they've said or done anything, you feel it, you see it. It's kind of something that almost shines off someone when they come into a room. And it normally is that they've got energy. So that shine in terms of like you'd get off a light or a heater because it's powered. There's that happens. There's also the way they make others feel. So people connect to them, they trust them, they know that they're in safe hands, that the work is going to get done. But there's also this alignment, I think, that comes with brilliance, this alignment of what your strengths are, what your values are, what you bring to the table, and what your sense of meaning and purpose is as well. So all of those things together, I think, kind of feed in to this sense of being brilliant. So whether it's peak performance, high performance, whatever we call it, brilliance was what it means for me. And I think when you look up that word in the dictionary, we also talk about brilliance in terms of intellectual capacity, if someone's got a brilliant mind. So intellect, inspiration, talent, exceptional. There's so many words associated with brilliance in the dictionary that I think sums up what it is somebody brings, that is not just about the performance and results they deliver, but so much more than that too.
I love it. And we have someone, so we have Mandeep sharing something with us. Time can't be replenished, but I feel that's what we sacrifice the most, thinking we have a lot of it.
True. So true, Mandeep. We do, right?
Yeah. And that's funny because we are all equal with the amount of time we have.
Yes.
You know, sometimes the world can be unfair. We can be unlucky in some endeavors, but the amount of time is the same.
Yeah, 100%. And it's something I'll often encourage clients to look at from a different perspective, because if we've got the same 24-hour block of time per day, and we all have, then we can either see that as opening up or closing down. So what that means is that when we get up in the morning, every hour we have of the day is an hour more, or we get up in the morning and every hour that we have of the day is an hour less. So it's either approaching zero or it's emerging from zero. And I think that's just a different mindset when we look at time as unfolding in front of us rather than condensing towards zero. It is more of a positive reframe on the same block of time, of course. And this isn't just about a 24-hour day. This can be about our whole entire lifespan. Every year we get to live as a year more rather than a year less. But it's the same year that we're looking at. It's just the frame that we put over it. And that can be useful for this sense of I'm running out of time, which we often have in busy days.
Yes. Yeah, thank you, Jess. And now, can you tell us like how people can reach out to you if they want to work with you? Like, what's the best way to do it?
Yeah, certainly. So LinkedIn is the best place to follow me. Lots of blogs and videos on this stuff. There's also a free page on my website. So free resources. There's a white paper that you can download from there. And that's jessstuart.co.nz, because I'm in New Zealand. So that's the best place to go. And there's a contact button there too. So I would love to chat if anybody's got any questions that they might want to not ask in a live event, but want to come and chat about, please feel free to.
Yeah, that's perfect. Yeah, thank you. And anything you want to leave with our people for change makers? Like, what would you say to a high performing? Because in fact, change makers, it's my way to say high performers out there. So,
Nice.
and because we live in a world in the constant and change, so that, but makers, it's about also doing, but that's right, it's also about being. So anyway, what would you leave us with today?
I think one of the tools that's been really useful for me as well as my clients is this concept of an energy audit, which I think I'll just leave on the table as an offering, as a gift for anyone on the call. And that is this ability, so easy to do, this ability to continually check in, almost like we had a fuel gauge on us, like our cars do, and know where we're at. Because when we know where we're at, we know what we need. So that gives us this ability to go, oh, my fuel gauge is low, my fuel light is coming on. What's my equivalent of going to the fuel station? Is it an early night? Is it going for a run? Is it a hot bath? Whatever that looks like for you, because we're all different. But if we don't know where we're at, and so many of us are too busy to even know where we're at, then we don't know what we need. So being able to audit our energy levels, similar to how our mobile phones do with their battery, I think is a great skill, and such an easy one to do that just allows us to check in and know not just where we're at, but then what we need.
So for more brilliance, check your energy level, because that's how you get this awareness, and from this awareness you can take action to make sure that you rise onto this energy level, and you can sustain it, and then you can capitalize on it. That's
Definitely.
where the magic is. So thank you, Jess. It was great to have you. And I will see everyone with my next guest in a few weeks' time. So bye for now, and make sure you are getting this brilliance out and making lots of change, spreading lots of good vibes and energy for other people out there. We need that. We need more of that. Thank you.